This week, we welcome Michael Pleasant. He's the Chief Executive Officer for Open Security. He'll be the interview segment for this show. In the next segment, the articles for discussion, special guest co-host Jason Albuquerque, who joins us. He's here, actually, already. He'll be here for both segments. But anyway, in the second segment, we're going to discuss 6 ways that you can establish which goals are important, how to diversify your professional network, the impact of perception and bias on leadership, and more. All that and more on Business Security Weekly that starts now. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending your assets? Have you penetration tested your public assets? Start 2018 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting at blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Welcome, everyone, to Business Security Weekly. This is episode 107, recorded on November 19th, 2018. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian. I am joined by my special in-studio guest co-host, Mr. Jason Albuquerque from Carousel Industries.
Hello there.
Welcome.
How are you again? Thanks for having me back.
Nice to have you here in studio. I'm glad you'll be making some more regular appearances on the show.
Absolutely.
It's awesome.
I will
Especially as Matt's like on vacation in Napa or something like that.
Hey, it's all good.
You know,
I'll fill in when I have to.
He's actually got some well-deserved time. He did not take time off in between gigs. Yeah. So I was actually glad he was. He was taking a break. So this is great. A couple announcements before we get started. Join us for our next webcast. It's the first time I'm announcing this webcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. It is with Chronicle Security, of course, the folks from Virus Total. It's titled Intelligence-Powered Malware Hunting. It'll be held on December 5th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You can go to securityweekly.com/chronicle. That's securityweekly.com/chronicle and register today. It's going to be a lot of fun. Michael Pleasant is here with us. He's the founding member and CEO of Open Security, where cybersecurity veterans use their passion, knowledge, and the latest tactics to aid clients and contribute to the open source community. They focus on attack, defense, remediation, hunting, and education. You can find out more at opensecurity.io. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It's nice to have you. And so, Michael, if you could just start with a little bit about your background. I know we thank you for your service as well as Jason. It's just Veterans Day not that long ago, but some of your background and how you came into the role that you hold today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I fell into this totally by accident. So I was in the Marine Corps for about 6 years. I was an intelligence analyst in the Marine Corps. I was an enlisted intel analyst, O231, which is the MOS code for us. I did that for about 6 years, and it was a ton of fun, had lots of great experiences. And then after I got out in May of 2013, I did what every other veteran and every other, especially intel guy does. I went into defense contracting for a little while. I did that for about 3 years, doing some more intel stuff. And that was okay. That was fine. Unfortunately, at some point throughout that experience, I being at like 25 or 26, I was allowed to work from home, which was awful for me. That just ruined me. After I did that, I never wanted to do anything else. So eventually I had to go back working in an office. That was fine, but I kind of wanted to work from home. Anyway, that whole experience ended up leading me to working with Matt Toussaint and a few other cyber professionals, cyber guys that I'd met in the military, who at some point or another came together and said, around that time period in 2013, said, hey, we want to do the cyber stuff. We want to do it on the outside in the private sector. Not really sure how. Hey, you want to work from home? Why don't you start a business that does the cyber thing and use us and our abilities and our capabilities and do the cyber thing? So in a nutshell, I said, sure, why not? Let's take a chance and let's do this entrepreneurship thing, however you spell that. And that's kind of how we started. And then we're now 3 years removed from that process. And well, more than 3 now, I guess, but it's 2018. Math is hard. And we're a few years into that process now, and so now we're open security, along with the whole open trend. Everything's open now, and that's where we are.
So, Michael and Jason, I'm sure you went through this too. I have never served in the military. However, I read lots of books and talk with lots of people that have, which affords me only the luxury to ask questions. And so when I was reading this book, it's called Unbeatable Mind by Mark Devine. Have you guys read that book yet?
I haven't. It's on my list. I haven't gotten into it yet.
Gotcha. So Michael Santarcangelo is one of the recommendations from Michael, who makes the best book recommendations on the planet.
He absolutely does.
I have to say, this one, not as good as some of the other recommendations, but it's hard to hit a grand slam with every This one's growing on me, though. Mark Devine was a former Navy SEAL, and what he describes, and it reminded me when you were talking about your journey, Michael, that when you came out of military service, and Mark was saying this in his book, that he was like, wow, that chapter is behind me. Now I have to move on to the next chapter. And he described it as fear. He was like, I don't have that. He was like used to all of the structure that being in the military provided him. He's like, now, I have to define my own structure now. And he's like, that was actually kind of scary for me. And, Mark was a former Navy SEAL. And to admit that there was fear involved in that. Was it a similar journey, for both of you?
Yeah, I think the real world, let's call it, is a scary place when you're going out there and you're a hard charger, you're structured, and you really had your mission totally defined for you. And again, I mean, we can talk about this on the Marine Corps side a little bit, right? It's not always totally defined for you, but at least objectives, right? And I mean, I'm sure, Michael, you can jump in here too, but we had these core set of principles that we always live by, right? And then when you get out into the real world or into industry, it's not always that, right? It's not always that structured. Not everybody has the same principles. Not everybody has that same mission. And literally, I mean, that's something that I want to talk to Michael about, right? Is how do you take those core leadership principles that guide you through the military and translate that, right? Obviously, you did that in a leadership capacity as a CEO of a company and building a company. You had to take those principles, I would think, and put it into private industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the things that you find out right away when you leave the military is that your sense of humor doesn't translate very well. But a lot of the processes and a lot of the things that you're used to, the structure that we were mentioning, does. And so the military transition process, although is a lot better now than it was, say, 10 or 20 years ago, the transition process is still very painful. It probably always will be, honestly. But it can be really painful. And it's part of that fear. It's part of you're given a mission and you're told, achieve this end state, and you're not really sure how. That's up to you to decide and you to figure out is how to achieve that end state. But in the military, there's a structure and there's a process, there's a chain of command, there are resources that are available to you. You know how to get to that end state. In the private sector, it exists there to a certain degree, but it's not as easily accessible. You kind of have to figure out and explore and discover and find some of those things. So yeah, there is that initial fear of like, I think I have an end state. I have to figure that out for myself. And now I also have to figure out that process. And so, yeah.
And that's good, bad, and indifferent, right? I mean, in the military, obviously, there's all that bureaucracy and things that you have to kind of get through. Sometimes it's frustrating as hell, right? So, I mean, there's a good and bad
most
about
of the time.
Yeah, most of the time, right?
Now, Michael, you transitioned from the military into a military contractor. Do you think that's an easier transition because there's similar kind of structure and you're working in a similar kind of space?
It was, yeah. So there's two things going from being in the military and then defense contractor. The reason, honestly, a lot of guys do it, guys and gals, is because of two reasons. It's one, the things you do in the military, just the day-to-day functions and the conversations that you have and the topics of work that you deal with are similar, usually in that same vein. If you go from an intel guy in the military to an intel guy in the defense contracting space, what you do is generally similar, but the culture is also similar. And that's something that's really important that I wanted to touch on today was the culture is similar because a lot of guys and gals do that. You are just inherently surrounded by people who either were in the military or are still in the military. You're still in that environment. So it's not sort of a cold go from point A to point B or go from black to white or hot to cold. You kind of have that lukewarm period. You can kind of transition.
Yeah, and certainly one of the things that the book that I'm currently reading from Mark Devine said was that, especially when he was in the SEAL unit, he's like, it was pretty much all about business, right? And if you have to execute a mission at that level that many of the SEALs or all of the SEALs are operating at, right? There was no room for a lot of the things that we may talk about in the corporate culture, right? Like the culture is just different. Like we have a mission, we have to stick to the mission, we all have to operate as a team. You got to put a lot of those personal things aside to focus on that mission. Was that part of a difficult, transition where I feel like in the corporate world, we don't always do a really good job of putting those things aside. In fact, you can hear me saying a lot of times, like, this isn't about feelings, right? In the corporate world, right? Like, this isn't about feelings. Like, this has to be about business in a lot of situations. That doesn't mean you, take feelings out of the equation entirely, but sometimes I, find myself having to refocus myself and others to say it's not about feelings, whereas I feel like that would come more natural after some time being in certain units, especially in the military.
No, I would agree. I think that's one of the beauty of having a veteran come into the private sector.
Sure.
We bring that level of leadership skills, that proficiency, and honestly, we're great at assessing risk, right? We're great at being on our toes and being agile and being able to move quickly. So, someone like me, I found it a great responsibility to bring to the private sector, like those skills, right? I love bringing that structure to my company, to my teams, right? So for me, I'm proud of it. I want to share it.
Yeah, and I completely echo that too. I love it's actually kind of a warm safety blanket for me to be able to wrap myself in my processes and in fact, behind me in my little library, I've got publications and documents, and I've got all those like big thick books that no one reads during the military that you really should read. But I have those now, and I use those as like comfort sort of defensive item now. Whenever something that needs to get figured out needs to be done, I can refer to those references and be like, well, here's how the military does it. I know how this works, so let me go ahead and apply that.
Yeah. It gives you a good framework to jump back to, right?
One thing was really funny that I also gleaned from I'm actually glad I read a lot of this book before this interview. It's helped me tremendously to keep pace with both of you on that front, right? My wife and I were planning Thanksgiving dinner, right? And so we had a turkey that was supposed to come from an online meal service that like wasn't making it, right? And so we went out and got another turkey, and then my wife's like, "What do we do? I don't understand. Do we cancel?" I'm like, one of the things I just learned from reading Unbeatable Mind was putting this lesson in a great, short, easy to understand phrase. And basically, what they said, one of the mantras of the Navy SEALs is that 2 is 1 and 1 is none. And then, like, when he said that, I was like, oh, I had to pause the book and just think about all of those times in my career as an operational network person, IT support person, security operations person, how many times that lesson, even podcast production, which is one of the things I want to talk about the production guys with, and share with them that story, because it really, when you're preparing for a mission or whether you're troubleshooting an IT problem, I'm like, that is absolutely true. Like everything that I've done in IT where something has to be reliable. Yeah. Like if you don't have 2 of something, then it's 2 is, it's just perfectly displayed out there. Is that
that's a great way to put it? I mean, I love that.
Preparing for mission, preparing for IT or project is in that respect is an awesome
have to have that
thing to transfer.
Plan,
it's a mindset that transfers. That I was trying to instill in my wife, and she got it. As soon as I used that thing, she was like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense, right?"
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, it's about having that contingency plan, right? And you want to. One of the things I always say is bring your A game. I say it to my teams. We always have to bring our A game to the table, and the A game is to know every scenario that's going to get put in front of us. Yeah, we need to know those scenarios the best we can, right? To the best of our abilities. So that way, if we get caught off guard a little bit, we know where we need to divert and go to.
Yep.
And one of the things we do really well in the military is something we like to refer to as called Barney style. We or case, keep it simple, stupid. We do that really well because there's a lowest common denominator we need to hit whenever we communicate anything really to anybody, and so we do that really well. But you can apply that same principle to people too, and that's one of the things we do in our company. Was I'm a Marine. I'm an intel guy. I didn't start out as a cyber guy. I just kind of fell into that. But one of the things that I've seen as sort of maybe as an outside observation is a lot of cyber firms, some maybe on the smaller end, they do one of 2 things. They either go super corporate, they have lots of middle management, or they go super like hacker in a hoodie, and they have just sort of like one person kind of does everything. So in our company, we decided to take the fire team model, which in the Marine Corps and also just infantry in general, the fire team model is this idea where you have 2 to 4 people generally, and they have a mission or an objective to accomplish, and so they do it. So for our company, we adopted that, where you always, instead of just having one single point of failure, whether it be equipment or people, we whenever we approach a project or a client or that sort of thing. We have a fire team leader, and then generally one or maybe two engineers. And so them together, there isn't a single point of failure. They can go together and work on a project or client. And again, it's the same principle applied to people and teams or equipment or anything else. Beans, bullets, Band-Aids, and beer.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. No, that's awesome. So you had mentioned that that you didn't start off in the cyber realm, right? You started off in Intel, and I'm in that same boat, right? I started off, I went to 29 Stumps for school, electronics communication, yeah, right.
I was stationed there for 2 years. I'm so sorry.
Right, and I mean, from there, I mean, Direct Air Support Center operations is what I was in, right? I mean, obviously a little on the technical side, but not to the cybersecurity level. One of my passions is how do we take folks who weren't in the MOSs that completely translate to cyber or IT, and how do we, number one, identify the folks who have the right attitude and aptitude to get into the field, right? And then help them and guide them and mentor them into the field, because we need those people bad.
We do.
And from our perspective, we wouldn't necessarily say a 7242 would translate into cyber, but it did over the years, right? I was able to take that ability to assess risk in the technical background and really hone in on it and become a CISO at this point. So how do we help them translate from jobs that wouldn't necessarily I get out of the Marine Corps and I have an MOS that I don't think could be a technical job, but how do we guide them into that realm?
I have a perfect example for that real quick, if you don't mind. So, and this translates really well into business as well. So in the Intel side, naturally being an Intel analyst, you think of, charts and maps and math and you think of smart guys, hopefully. But some of the best Intel guys in the Marine Corps anyway that I've ever worked with were prior infantry, prior grunts. And the reason is those prior grunts, those prior infantrymen or riflemen who come over and lap move is what we call it in the military. When they lap move into the Intel field, they end up being really outstanding Intel guys. And the reason is because the Intel field at the end of the day produces intelligence or conducts analysis, or we do our job in support of the rifleman, in support of the infantryman, that guy who's on patrol, kicking down doors, taking names, talking to people, whatever he's doing. The reason we do it is for that guy. And so when that guy comes over into our field, he can very easily say, the things you're doing for yourself. You're doing Intel for the sake of doing Intel. You're not doing Intel for the sake of the customer or the client. You have to keep that in mind. Why are you doing your job? You're doing it for the client and their needs. Let me, as a former client, let me articulate better what those requirements are, how I actually use your product, how I actually use the stuff you do in the field. Let me explain that to you and then direct the way you do business a little bit better. And so Intel improves by integrating somebody who's not an Intel person, but somebody whom Intel serves. And again, that has business application for us as well. We bring in somebody who's not a cyber guy, but maybe somebody who is affected by the cyber industry or the cyber field or his cyber colleague, bring that perspective in. We can see we don't work in a vacuum is essentially the point there. And so that translates really well.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great story.
I think two of the qualities that I appreciate, your point of, when people transition from the military into a commercial space, one of the things, and Michael was mentioning it earlier, is that the ability to break things down and communicate simply. And I think we do a poor job of that in IT security in general, is making sure everyone understands the mission in a way that you can easily understand. I think when I actually read that in a different book, Extreme Ownership was the other book that was in. Right. And I was like, wow, we really don't do a good job of that, especially in IT in general, of making that the mission very simple for folks. Because what we're dealing with is very, very technically complicated often. I don't think we often take a step back and go, all right, well, how do I just make sure everyone understands the mission at a very basic level and not overload them with all these details?
Yeah. Well, and this is just from my personal experience. I mean, we talked about the leadership principles of the Marine Corps, right? And one of those is keep your Marines informed. So, at the end of the day, we, as leaders within the Marine Corps, we had to make sure that our Marines were kept informed, and you had to boil it down as simple as you possibly can to make sure the entire audience can understand what the mission is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for us in open security, actually, we went through a growing pain. So we started as a startup, very small team, and then grew into a business. And part of that startup puberty that we went through was figuring out what our mission was. And we struggled a lot with kind of being comfortable in our own skin and what our mission was. What is it we're doing and why? Yeah, we're doing cyber. What does that mean? And very quickly, just to kind of take you through some of that thought process, we went back to what we knew in the military, and we said, okay, what is a mission statement? Now we can talk about how to craft a mission statement and the staff planning process, and we can talk about all that in length, because that's you can get a doctorate in that kind of stuff. But to put it very simply, we said a mission statement in the military is directive. It is directive at the team or at the staff to be able to plan for a mission, but it says you will accomplish X, Y, and Z. And so our first mission statement in open security, I'm going to read it to you word for word. I'm going to show you how just awful this was. It was bring military discipline to the cybersecurity practice in order to guarantee business value by providing actionable intelligence targeting critical organizational risk. That was our mission statement as the company. And like, we can dissect that, and we can see kind of where we're going and why, and like you can kind of see our thought process, and that's fine for like baby's first business, but that's garbage mission statement, because it's kind of directive, but it's just garbage. So we went through the whole we went through the thought process, and we thought a lot about it, and we said, okay, we want to be directive, sure, but what's the next biggest takeaway? And for me as a leader, it needs to be accountable. I need to be able to hold not only the company as a whole, but the individual in the company accountable to this mission statement. So we eventually landed on a new mission statement, which was make cybersecurity accessible. It has a little bit of aspirational piece to it, as a mission statement kind of does. It's directive. You will make cybersecurity accessible, but it also means that if we're in a meeting, and in the military, we have this thing called the good idea fairy that pops up. Somebody will have a good idea that they want, a bright, shiny toy that they want to like chase down. And what this new mission statement, make cybersecurity accessible, means is in that meeting, when somebody has a good idea, I can directly say, does that help our clients achieve or access cybersecurity?
Yeah.
Does it let them do that?
Does it align to the mission? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. If it does, then we can carry on down that conversation. And if it doesn't right away, then we can prioritize that a little bit easier. And so it's directive, but accountable. And so that mission statement crafting and that mission was something that we went through.
I think that's great. And again, that speaks to, leadership 101 in the military, right? Seek responsibility, of your team and yourself, right? You're always looking for that level of accountability. You want to make sure that you can have.
The other skill that I learned in IT just by being put right into the fire, essentially, but I firmly believe that people that are transitioning out of the military have is that ability to operate under pressure, right? I think it's why, because I've been there so many times where like the whole network has been down, where users can't get email at so many points in my career, and admittedly, a lot of times, all the time, a lot of times that was my fault, right? We talk about extreme ownership, right? I caused that. No, other times, obviously, there was some other, factor that was causing an outage, but it was only, it took years for me to develop that calm, cool, level head, focus, prioritize, execute, and focus on the task at hand, and not get flustered. It took a long time for that, right? Whereas today, like when we have a problem with the production of the show, like I'm the one standing there calmly, and everyone else that haven't had that level of experience for that many years, because they're young and I'm old, right? And I bring that calmness. But I think when you're transitioning out of the military, that you inevitably have that quality in some capacity, and likely a very large capacity. You have that where if you're standing in front of a rack of servers that don't work, that's you've learned and trained yourself in that training has trained you to be calm during that.
I have this phrase that I use every once in a while when the stuff is hitting the fan. And I'll look at the team and just say, first world problems, right? Come on, we can do this. It's first world problems here. Come on.
Right.
At the end of the day, there's not bullets flying at you. There's not missiles coming up pointed at you.
That's what I was going to say. Like, you're not getting shot at today. Okay, you're going to be fine. You're going to go home. There's going to be some traffic, but like you're going to be fine.
Exactly. You got it.
But that's a great quality to have, though.
Yeah. It is.
It speaks to your point. We need that quality in IT in general and in security, because there's always going to be a security incident, right?
That's why we exist.
And there's always going to be a project you're trying to implement something that has the potential to disrupt business functions as well. So I think for both those cases, it's a huge skill to have.
Absolutely.
Huge skill to have. And I think it takes a lot longer to, in my belief, to acquire that skill in IT versus in a side of a military setting, for example.
Culturally, one of the things that we do in the military really well, that I think, I really like this concept a lot, is this idea of good initiative, bad judgment.
Mhm.
That's one of the things that I push on to my guys a lot is I want you to take initiative. Because without initiative, you're not going to innovate. You're not going to come up with new solutions or new good ideas. But by encouraging you to take initiative, it means that sometimes you're gonna have bad judgment,
Mhm.
and that means that I have to, as a leader, I have to accept some level of risk, not just to the business, but possibly to a little bit of PR and some other things too. But
Sure.
what it means is that I'm encouraging you to take good initiative. If you have bad judgment, that's okay. It's gonna happen. I accept it, acknowledge that it's gonna happen, and when it does, the business is going to be fine. I can step in, I can dial it back, or
Mhm.
we can fix the problem. It's going to be okay. And so, with that cultural mindset in mind, it means that when the stuff hits the fan, that
Mhm.
they know, okay, I've taken good initiative. I maybe have gone too far. We can pull back, but it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point because you don't want your team sitting back afraid to do anything.
No.
Right? You
Can't.
got to have them executing, but give them guidance to
That's right.
execute
That's
and
right.
understand that it's not going to be 100% perfect 100% of the
That's
time.
right. And those failures are what you learn from.
Absolutely.
You know, what is it? We train the way we fight, right? So if we're not out there training and failing and learning from those experiences, when it's time for battle, we're going to be scared, or we're going to hold back,
Right.
or we're not going to be confident enough to execute where we need
It's
to
one of my
execute, so.
favorite quotes from Churchill, right? Success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm.
Yeah, agreed. And from our perspective, good leaders are going to make sure that we're not putting too much risk
Mm-hmm.
on the company, and that we're creating an environment where it's safe to fail.
Right.
It's safe to have those lessons learned.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's important.
The thing that I like to say is no good plan survives first contact with the enemy, because we just say that in the military a lot anyway, because we know we're gonna plan our hearts out. We're gonna plan as much as we can, but that plan is not gonna survive first contact with the enemy.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting as I read these books and hear the accounts of missions. I've actually come to anticipate now, like the part of the story where they're actually executing the plan in a real world situation, like what's going to go wrong.
Yeah.
Because like in every single case, they've planned it a certain way, and they're telling the story to make you realize how they adapted and overcome, right? And I'm just like, now I'm to the point where I'm like, I'm just waiting for it when they tell these stories in the books, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. I have a question. Like, so getting out of the military and being an entrepreneur and starting a business, how's the environment? How is the environment for someone who wants to start a business? Do you have the help out there financially? Do you have the help out there from a business mentorship perspective? I'm looking at the market right now just to see how successful can someone leaving the military want to be a business owner, and how is that transition? Is it easy? Is it hard? Is there a lot of red tape?
Yeah. So the short answer to that is there are tons of resources out there. There are all kinds of stuff out there, not just focused specifically at veterans, but just entrepreneurs in general. There's lots out there. However, you have to be proactive to find them. You have to be proactive to get to them and network, and you have to want it to actually go get it. A couple of statistics for you. So out of World War II, of all the boys and girls that came back home from World War II, about half of them actually started new businesses for themselves. They were entrepreneurs, which was great for themselves. They were great for the American economy. It was awesome. But nowadays, out of World War II, it was about 50%. Nowadays, it's about 4%. That number's dropped quite a bit. But we know from census data, we know that roughly 20 to 25% of veterans want to start new businesses.
Yeah.
And so there is still a large majority, there's still a good portion of the military that wants to start those businesses. And there are resources out there. The SBA is a great one. Bunker Labs is another good one. Bunker Labs is a nonprofit that specifically focuses on veterans and helping, supporting, and connecting them being entrepreneurs. Here in San Antonio, there are lots of other organizations here, not just incubators, but the city has done a lot of things. And you can find these things in lots of other cities as well. And so, yes, they are out there, but you have to be proactive and find them. One of the first things I did when I decided this is what I was going to do was literally just go to LinkedIn and be like, who is in my network? And I just asked everybody, hey, I'm starting a business. What do you know about that? How can you help me? And that was my first step.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Great advice. A lot of people in our field that I'm friends with that have very successful ventures today started out just like that. Like basically, I asked everyone that I knew for a favor. Right. That's a good way to start and a good way to think about it. Michael, I want to ask you, open security. What is open security for our audience?
Yeah. So Open Security is a B2B cybersecurity services provider. We do all your typical suite of services, penetration tests and vulnerability assessments and web app tests and all that kind of stuff. One of the ways that we differentiate ourselves, though, is we say cybersecurity right now, I like to call it the Wild West, but it's crowded with cowboys. It's hard for a business, especially a small to mid-cap business. It's really hard for them to shop for cybersecurity services. And so one of the ways that we're trying to make that process easier is by saying, well, let's look at some other industries like auto insurance, right? If you want an auto insurance quote, you go to a website and you get a quote and you can shop around and that kind of thing. And so we're trying to adopt a similar model. So for Open Security, what we say is if you're in the market for cybersecurity services and you're trying to shop around and you find that difficult, come to us. We will give you a free external vulnerability scan of your network or your environment. We'll give you that data, and it's typically just an Nessus scan or a Burp Suite or any other scan that you might already have, but we're going to do it for you. We'll give you that data and as well as a objective third-party look at that data. And then what we're going to do is tell you to go shop around. Give that data, give that report to other cybersecurity firms you're trying to shop around for, or you're trying to vet, and see what they say. And what we're trying to do is help that process along, help you be more informed, help your decision about how you acquire or achieve or access cybersecurity, make that data driven. And so we're going to give you that data. We're going to give it to you for free, just like an auto insurance quote. And then hopefully that makes you better. It lets you achieve cybersecurity at the best price, whether it's with us or somebody else. But we're trying to push that model. We're trying to be disruptive in that way. And so that's what Open Security is to our business in local area as well as anybody else in America.
Awesome.
Yeah, outstanding.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for appearing on Business Security Weekly. Those who want to learn more can go to opensecurity.io. Thanks again, Michael.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Mike.
it.
Without take a short break, come back, talk about communication and leadership in the next segment. Stay tuned.